Today we're going to look at the how fully question and the ways that it's marked. And by looking at the marking for the how fully question and having a go at the marking yourself, you will develop a much better understanding of the mistakes that are often made, how to avoid them, and how to make sure that you're structuring and your answers correctly and including the right kind of information. The best way to do this is just to have a look at a question straight off. And so this is a question from the SQA past papers. I think it's 2016, but it might be 2015. And it's about the actions of the Ku Klux Klan. So source says, the original Ku Klux Klan was a white supremacist organisation founded in 1866. Wearing white robes and pointed hats, the Klan of the 1920s looked similar to the original. During elections, the Klan would wait outside the voting place to beat up blacks if they came near. Women considered immoral were also targeted by the Klan. A divorced woman in Texas was tarred and feathered for remarrying. A massive march in Washington, D.C. in 1925 was a demonstration of the Klan's power. And the question asks us, how fully does source A describe the actions of the Ku Klux Klan in the 1920s? Use the source and recall to reach a judgment. So I have provided an answer. Source A quite fully describes the action of the KKK. Source A says, wearing white robes and pointed hats, the Klan of the 1920s looked similar to the original. Source A says, during elections, the Klan would wait outside the voting place to beat up blacks if they came near. A divorced woman in Texas was tarred and feathered for remarrying. Source A fails to mention the KKK held ceremonies and used secret codes to communicate. Source A fails to mention the KKK burned down many black churches across the southern states. Source A fails to mention the police did not investigate many KKK actions. So you have to give a mark, to explain whether we would give the following marks. So first thing is that, well, actually before that even, first thing is that there is a judgment there. Source A quite fully describes the action of the KKK. Now if that judgment is missing, if you don't include that at the start, then the maximum you can get is 2 out of 6. So a judgment has to be made in order for the answer to receive the maximum marks. So always make sure you're starting off with the judgment. So the judgment is there. So the first point, source A says, wearing white robes and pointed hats, the Klan of the 1920s looked similar to the original. Now that does describe an action of the KKK, so it's a relevant source point, so you get a mark for that. During elections, the Klan would wait outside the voting place to beat up blacks if they came near. You get a mark for that because it's a relevant source point. The third one, a divorced woman in Texas was tarred and feathered for remarrying. You don't get a mark for that because it is a relevant source point, but there's no explanation that it came from the source, so that's just a quote from the source, but it doesn't say source A says. So you need to explain where you got the point in order to get the mark. So no mark for that. Source A fails to mention the KKK held ceremonies and used secret codes. That is a relevant recall point because it's an action of the KKK. Fails to mention the KKK burned down many black churches across the southern states. Again, you get a mark for that because it's a relevant recall point. And then the final point, source A fails to mention the police did not investigate many KKK actions. Now that is not an action of the KKK, that is an action of the police. So that is not a mark. So you don't get a mark for that because it's not relevant to the question. Now you could have said anything else there about how various other groups interacted with the KKK, but you wouldn't get a mark. It has to be a specific action of the KKK. So you've got to make sure you're reading the question fully there. So there are 4 correct marks there, and because they have a judgment, that means they can get more than 2. They can access all the marks basically. So the total mark there is 4 out of 6. Now I've given you 3 different questions for you to mark where I've written answers, and I want you to do basically the same thing. Explain whether you would give the mark or whether you would not, and if you are not going to give the mark, just a few words like I've done to explain why you don't get the mark and justifying the overall mark at the end. Nice and straightforward, hopefully. And once again, the aim of this is really to get you to think about the questions, think about the answers, how to structure them, what sort of mistakes are made and how to avoid those mistakes. And if you do that, and if you're engaging with the kind of stuff, then that will really help you better understand how to answer the questions, which is obviously going to help you ultimately in the exam.